Let's bring in Chris Mannix, who I usually don't talk about this stuff publicly, but is signing a new deal with the Volume because we love him and we're never letting him go. Unlike KD in Brooklyn, he ain't walking out the door. So let's start with that one. So listen, I full disclosure, I never liked it. The analogy I always use, Chris, that if Patrick Mahomes left the Chiefs to go play with the Jets with a friend, we would tell him to get therapy. It would be obscene. You wouldn't leave Andy Reid, that family, that general manager, that structure. I did not like KD leaving, but I love him. He's earned the right to play with committed teammates, and I don't trust Kyrie or Simmons. So I'd rather have him acknowledge a little bit of a whiff by me. I want out. I would rather, I say this all the time. We all make mistakes. Don't double down on them. Just acknowledge it. I whiffed. So there's a lot of talk about Miami and Phoenix. Just structurally, which one makes more sense to you that could fortify the Nets? Which one works? Or is there a gem out there that's not being discussed for KD?
I don't think a deal with Miami works because for logistical reasons, you can't include Bam Adebayo in a deal right now. And Miami wasn't going to throw Adebayo in a deal anyway. He is the backbone of what that team does defensively. So now you're talking about Tyler Hero and draft picks, and I don't think that's enough to get the interest of Brooklyn in a trade. Phoenix is certainly interesting because Phoenix can put, theoretically, DeAndre Ayton in a deal, Mikal Bridges in a deal. They've got a whole bunch of draft picks. And I don't know, Colin, if you read that Kevin Arnovitz story on ESPN a couple of weeks ago, where James Jones, the general manager there, effectively said, we don't care about the draft. Like, we deal in free agency and trades, and that's how we build a winner. So the Suns wouldn't blink, including a lot of draft picks in a deal with the Nets. So I think that's probably the favorite right now because you have to include the fact that Kevin Durant wants to go there. And even though he doesn't have a no trade clause, he's going to have wield enormous power in this situation. The dark horse to me, Boston Celtics, because the Celtics could theoretically throw the best player in a deal in Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown was not an all-star this year, but that's largely because he had so many COVID and injury issues in the first half of the season. He played like an all-star in the second half. He's 25 years old. He's been deep in the playoffs many times, so he's experienced in that vein. And he's got 2 years remaining on his contract. So the Celtics, they could put together a deal involving Jaylen Brown and a bunch of draft picks. Maybe you throw another young player in there. Grant Williams would make some sense if you're Brooklyn, and bring Kevin Durant to Boston. Now, the follow-up question, why would Kevin Durant want to go to Boston? Well, there's a few reasons. One, go back to 2016. Kevin Durant take a meeting with in the Hamptons. Celtics. He met with them back when Isaiah Thomas was there. Al Horford was there. He's got a good relationship with Horford, who's still going to be there next year. So there's already some interest from Kevin Durant in playing in Boston. The Celtics just whooped him in the first round of the playoffs. So he knows how good that team is. Ime Udoka, a coach in Brooklyn last year, has a relationship with Kevin Durant. There's just a lot of loose ties to Boston that Kevin Durant has. Finally, he's heavily involved in his own media company. That media company is based in New York. I don't think it would bother Kevin one bit to still have close proximity to New York, to still be in that Northeast corridor where he's trying to build something off the floor. So for those reasons, I think the Celtics kind of loom as a dark horse in this race.
All right. Kyrie to the Lakers. I said a couple of weeks ago, I got some pushback on it, but I said, listen, Kyrie acknowledged I blew up the Cleveland situation. LeBron's at a point in his career where I don't know if he trusts the Buss family up top or Rob Pelinka. What they don't have is shooters. And the Lakers, David Fizdale told me, he goes, statistically, we had the second most open three-point shots in the league. We can't hit them, Westbrook and AD. He says, we need shooters. And when he said that, I remember driving home that day thinking, Kyrie's acknowledged he messed up. LeBron and Kyrie played together and played well together. Kyrie needs a restart. The New York media is crushing him. I don't think it bothers him to be in Los Angeles, an exploding economy. And so now stories come out. And do you buy them that Kyrie and the Lakers has real momentum? What do you make of those?
I think it's probably the only place Kyrie can wind up at this point, because when I talk to league executives about landing spots for Kyrie, there's nobody out there. I mean, would Miami take him on as a buyout candidate? Maybe the Heat could plug and play him in there at the point guard position with Kyle Lowry starting to age and showing his age in the postseason some. Dallas, I think, has to be at least considered in all this. The Mavericks just lost Jalen Brunson. And if you're talking about a trade that might interest the Nets, Dallas could send Spencer Dinwiddie back to Brooklyn. Yep. They could throw Davis Bertans' crappy contract in that deal and then sweeten the pot with a first-round pick. Look, the Nets have made it clear they're not looking for a rebuilding package. It doesn't make any sense for them because none of their draft picks belong to them. So they're trying to win. So Spencer Dinwiddie, Davis Bertans, and a first-round pick would probably be the best offer you can get in terms of maintaining relevance next season. Now, the Lakers, what they can obviously do is put Russell Westbrook there and say, here are 2 first-round picks. And that might be appealing to Brooklyn only because they could then take those first-round picks and move them for somebody else and get themselves a player back in return. But when I handicap the chances of an Irving deal straight up, a trade happening, it's the Lakers at like 80%, the Mavericks at like 19%, and then mystery team X that might go crazy at maybe 1%. But right now, LA, it feels like the only real fit because the Lakers, they're desperate. They are doing the same thing this offseason they did last offseason. Lonnie Walker is the new Malik Monk. They're bringing in some young athletic guys, and none of it is going to matter because you still have Westbrook on the roster with LeBron and AD, and if you can't make that work, nothing else makes any sense. So I think they would welcome Irving, if for no other reason than to get off the Westbrook contract.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the Lakers are in a desperate situation. It's also important to note, Chris, when you live in Los Angeles, the Rams won a Super Bowl. The Dodgers draw $4 to $5 million. LAFC is good. The Clippers are now relevant. The Chargers have Justin Herbert, Lincoln Riley, and USC. It's a competitive market. It's a distracted market. You got to win games here. And this idea of draft picks, well, hell, Chris, these draft picks are 19. A 2027 draft pick, if he hits, isn't delivering till 2030. That's 8 years. LA doesn't work in an 8-year clock, except in our traffic. Outside of that, we're not patient people. So I think sometimes desperation ends up making stuff work. Is that, it's the old beggars can't be choosers. Lakers are in a really tough spot right now. Okay, so the mystery moment of the internet was First Take Brian Windhorst going on. And you and I know Brian. I've always liked Brian. It was very compelling television. He kind of slowly laid out the mystery. Danny Ainge now, of course, runs the Jazz, of a trade they just made with Brooklyn. And he wouldn't give away the answer. And I'm trying to find, it's like the Loch Ness Monster. I'm getting bits and pieces and shadows, but show me the monster. So he's talking about what's going on and sort of the enigmatic move by Utah without giving me the answer. So what was Brian Windhorst, for the love of God and all things fascinating basketball, what is he getting at?
What he's getting at is that there are major signs that Utah is getting ready to tear that whole thing apart. And this is something that I've been writing, I've got the receipts for it, since Danny Ainge got that job. Because one thing I know about Danny Ainge is that he is not satisfied with mediocrity. He is not satisfied with playoff appearances, second round exits. If he sees a team that has plateaued, he is going to shred that team. We know that because he did it. He did it in 2013 when the Celtics, still relevant, I think they were a second round team their last year with KG and Pierce, still relevant. He traded everybody. Traded Pierce and KG first, traded Rondo later, strip that team down for draft picks and spare parts. If you watch the Jazz in the postseason, you know they're not close. They got beat in the first round, and they got beat soundly by Dallas, and they have nothing internal that's going to make them better. So when I had two thoughts when Royce O'Neal was traded to Brooklyn. One was that, did Sean Marks make this deal without knowing about Kevin Durant's trade demand? Because it doesn't make any sense for Brooklyn either. Like, with Durant wanting out and Kyrie going out, it makes no sense. So there's a part of me that wondered, well, we know Durant went to Joe Tsai with his trade request. Was this information not filtered down to Sean Marks before he made this deal for Royce O'Neal? Why do you need Royce O'Neal, especially for a first-round draft pick, if you're trading Kevin Durant? So that was my first thought on the Brooklyn side. On the Jazz side, this was just another signal that they are going into a rebuild. The first signal was Danny Ainge being hired. The second signal was Will Hardy, a young assistant coach, an excellent coach, being given a 5-year contract. You do not give a first-time head coach a 5-year contract unless you want him to be losing proof, unless you're telling him that it's okay to lose 60 games in the first couple of years. You've got some job security here with us. Remember, Frank Vogel with the Lakers, when they were a contender, 3-year contract right away. That's the contract you give if you're trying to build a contender. If they were going to keep that team together, Colin, they would have given Will a 3-year contract. So if it didn't work out, you're not tied to him for year 4 and year 5 of that deal. And this Royce O'Neal trade, Royce O'Neal, who, by the way, extremely close with Donovan Mitchell. Eric Pascal, extremely close with Donovan Mitchell. He was just non-tendered by the Jazz. All these signs, like, these are becoming giant, unmissable signs that the Jazz are going to blow this thing up. So I am fully expecting at some point this offseason for the Jazz to trade Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell and strip this team down for spare parts.
I think Mitchell fits in Miami. That's, to me, because as much as I love, Bam is the soul of your defense. Butler is the great two-way athlete. But Jimmy's not always a definitive scorer. He's a 21-point-a-game guy. Donovan Mitchell, and he also doesn't need the ball in his hands constantly, because sometimes Donovan Mitchell has got a little Westbrook. But I think with Spoelstra, and Mitchell's also no longer a willing defender, at least not as much as he was early in his career. So you got the bucket covered defensively. Butler's a good defensive player. I think Donovan can play better defense when pressured by Butler to do it and Spoelstra. I think Mitchell works in Miami. Your thoughts?
I think he works great in Miami, and I would make, once the dust settles on Kevin Durant, I would make Miami one of the front runners to land him, because that package of players that I was talking about for Durant that doesn't work for the Nets, that might work for Danny Ainge in Utah. You can get Tyler Hero, an excellent offensive player, certainly one with defensive liabilities, but you can get Tyler Hero presumably on a long-term contract. I was told that Tyler's deal is going to be worked out sometime in the next couple of days with the Heat. You can get him on a long-term deal and build around him with all the draft picks Miami can give you. They've got a bunch of draft picks they can trade. Well, the Heat are in win now mode. I agree with you. Mitchell can be a better defender. When you talk to people in Utah, the one thing they said was Donovan Mitchell did not come into camp this year or last year in the best of shape. You're going to be in shape in Miami. You literally can't play for Miami unless you pass their fitness tests and are in the kind of shape you need to be in to play for the Miami Heat. A better conditioned Donovan Mitchell will be a better defender. And if you're talking Kyle Lowry, Donovan Mitchell, and Jimmy Butler on the perimeter, that's pretty damn good. And Mitchell can contribute to point guard play as well, because he's done some of that with Utah. I think Miami makes a lot of sense for Donovan Mitchell. And I think you'll start hearing more about a Mitchell trade once the dust settles with Durant.